it's slightly unnerving to talk into a webinar without exactly seeing everybody's face or whatever. So I would just encourage you to please chime in, interrupt me, whatever. I'd love to make this as interactive as possible. I know that a webinar is not the most conducive to the kinds of learning experiences that we're talking about here. So please help me make it as interactive as possible. And secondly, having looked at the list of folks who registered for the webinar, I know many of you, and many of you are my heroes in this work. And so I really want to just approach this with a spirit of fellow travelership and humility, and recognizing that we all have a ton to learn from one another, and I'm excited to learn from you through the course of this discussion. So I will, with that said, I'll jump in and I'll introduce myself a little bit by way of talking about my own personal journey into this work. I co-founded Transcend a couple of years ago, but prior to that, I spent about a decade at Teach for America, which is a national nonprofit where I was responsible for, in various configurations, the training and the support of Teach for America's core members, our first and second year teachers across the country. And through that experience, just saw such inspiring work by communities, core members themselves, teachers in the schools that they taught in. And one of the questions that I was really thinking a lot about, and our team was working on, was what does it take to help support teachers to be as effective as possible? And we learned a lot and tried many things, and I think had lots of successes at helping teachers become more skillful at different parts of their role, whether content or pedagogy or classroom management or any number of different things. But one of the observations that I had, and in part through looking at research on the effectiveness of teacher professional learning, is that one of the constraints of teachers' performance is the design of the role that they're in the first place. I began to feel more and more strongly that the way that we as a society in school design construct teachers' roles can make it very challenging to meet the needs of every student to their fullest potential in a way that is also really winnable and sustainable for teachers. So I began wrestling with this question of what would it look like to rethink the role of the teacher? And when you pull on that thread, you start to get to the question of what would it look like to reimagine the classroom? And pretty soon that takes you to reimagining a school design or a learning community more broadly. And so that was one of the real motivations for me. A second motivation was, as Delano mentioned, I helped to found some charter schools in New York City called Leadership Prep Charter Schools, which became part of the Uncommon Network, as a board member. And I had a feeling of simultaneously feeling incredibly proud of our scholars and of our teachers and of the school leaders, but also feeling like there was something that we were leaving on the table in terms of the holistic experience for kids, in terms of really fostering self-drive and agency and independence and the kinds of things that that kids and all of us need to be successful in today's world, and certainly in a fast-changing future. And so it felt to me like the problem was certainly not with the kids or with the teachers or with the parents, but really with the situation, the design of the learning situation that we were putting people in, that led me to say, what might be possible if we could reimagine even the situation that everyone is operating in. And then the last driver in terms of my own motivation is just my own experience as a parent. So these are my own two kids and my family, Jacob and Eden. This is a couple of years ago, but Jacob's now in 5th grade, Eden's now in 3rd grade, in a very traditionally designed mainstream public school system. And as a parent watching my kids in a relatively traditional passive mode of learning, just I could see how much more potential they had that was just not being engaged. And I felt, I think every parent sees the greatest potential in their kids, and it can be heartbreaking when you don't feel as though all the potential, all the learning potential is being engaged. And again, to me, it wasn't a problem with their teachers or their school leaders or anything like that, who are amazing, dedicated people. It was the design of the situation that everyone was operating in. All three of those kind of pathways then led me to say, there's got to be a different way. As part of the journey, I worked on this paper called Dissatisfied Yet Optimistic together with 3 co-authors, Stacy Childress, who leads New Schools Venture Fund, Elan Samoa, who co-founded Transcend with me, and Diane Tavener, who leads Summit Public Schools. And Stacy and Diane are also board members of Transcend. So we really put our heads together thinking about this, learning from lots of experiences and examples of others doing great, innovative work. And the first question that we asked ourselves was, what are we seeing right now? And I'm sure many of you are familiar with pictures like this, but just to kind of lay it out, if you were to Google the word classroom and 1900s, you would get lots of images that look like this. If you were to Google classroom in the 1950s, you would get lots of images that might look pretty similar. If you were to Google classroom in 2000s, you'd get very similar images. They would now be in color instead of black and white. But the basic features of a classroom, as we all know, just haven't changed for over a century. And so we asked ourselves, well, what does need to be different? And it's not like we came up with these ideas out of our heads. We really listened to many, many other people and watched what many people were doing, but tried to synthesize them for ourselves in a way that Transcend refers to as the 8 great leaps. 8 major leaps or evolutions in the ways that schools are designed and operate. So I want to go through these, and then I'm going to pause for a little bit of discussion and reaction, and then talk about what is our theory of change for how to get there. But the first of the 8 leaps is really around literally what is the goal of school in the first place? What is school focusing on? And so whereas a traditionally designed school model in mainstream America today, but over time has really focused on a relatively narrowly defined set of student outcomes through academics and core disciplines. You've got math and you've got social studies, etc., as opposed to a leap towards what the 21st century demands related to broader, more holistic student outcomes, not letting go of rigorous academics, but also weaving them in with one another in an interdisciplinary way, fostering habits of success, skills for the new economy, problem finding, innovation, etc., personal leadership, and also, very importantly, critical consciousness to take a look at what are the forces at play in society that are perpetuating oppression, and what does it look like to notice those and engage and transform those. So the first body of leaps is literally what's school trying to do in the first place. The second is, what are the expectations of school? So whereas the traditional school model has really been about sorting and making determinations very early in a child's life around what path they're on, hard to get off different paths, disproportionately disadvantaging kids from low-income backgrounds, kids of color, kids who learn differently, to a set of expectations that are really limitless, where expectations are high for every child, as many doors open for as long as possible, regardless of starting levels, regardless of demographics, and it's about how do we keep all those doors open, etc. Literally a very different thing than schools have been designed for, and it's really a design question. Third is, what is the learner's role? So whereas the traditional school model, my own kids are largely in a passive mode. They are told what they're going to study. They're told when they're going to study it. They're told how they're going to demonstrate mastery. They're told when they show, etc. To what would it mean to set up learners to actually be making a bunch of those decisions for themselves, obviously with supports and with the right scaffoldings and so on. But really thinking about what are if we're going to be preparing kids for jobs that don't even exist today, and for needing to invent themselves and their jobs and reinvent themselves, how do we actually set up learning environments where learners are practicing doing that and really building the skills to be active drivers of their own learning, and also trusting learners that they can and will drive themselves if we set them up in the right ways. Fourth being learning modes. So whereas a traditional environment has kids in a fixed learning modes, here's your classroom, here's your teacher, here's your school, here's when you learn, here's when learning is over, here's when homework's, all of those kinds of things that are very rigid, really asking ourselves, how come when you can book transportation anywhere, anytime, when you can book accommodations anywhere, anytime, when medicine is happening in your home, etc., why can't learning be the same way? Why can't learning be flexible? Learning from who is going to be your best teacher, in whatever ways you learn best, when you want to learn best, etc. That's the fourth leap. The fifth is really around the role of educators. Somebody has used the analogy, and I'm sure many of you have heard it. It would be as if we were to say about medicine, that the doctor has to be the general practitioner, and the neurosurgeon and the nurse and the x-ray technician and the person who cleans the rooms afterwards and the person who discovers the drugs, all in one role. And then ask the question, how come we can't make doctors more effective? We're asking so much of teachers, so many different hats, often very much in a solo situation. What would happen if we could make a leap towards many people being educators, many caring adults, including other people who don't even technically work in school, but also educators within school having specialized roles based on different strengths and different skills, as opposed to the jack of all trades with one person wearing many hats. The sixth is the role of families. I know in my own experience as a parent, it can feel marginalizing to be on the outside of school, to feel like I'm sending my kid to school once in a while. We have a parent-teacher conference. I might get a letter, etc. I might be able to look at homework, but still largely, I'm sort of a passive customer of education. What would it actually mean if I was deeply and regularly plugged in, not just to what my kids are learning, but to discussions with my kids and their teachers about their dreams in life and their goals and their choices and their progress and how what's happening in school relates to that, what I can do to support, etc. A very, very different role, an important role of families. Seventh is the school community. So in a traditional model, often segregated, often fragmented, often segregated in inequitable ways. What if we could imagine learning communities that were truly interconnected, truly equitable, truly diverse, where there was an emphasis on really building shared community with love at the center, with restoration at the center, with equity at the center as well, to prepare kids for the diverse world that we're living in, to benefit from the research base, which says how important and how powerful it can be to leverage diversity, etc. And lastly, technology. Whereas in the traditional model, there have been, there are computers and there have been, everything from videos to film strips, etc., but still largely plugging in to kind of digitize the traditional model. What if technology was a real enabler? Not because technology is in the end of itself, but what if it could actually be used in ways that could enhance human connections, enable widespread personalization, enable kids to drive their own learning, etc. So those are what we imagine to be possibilities in the future, and what we see already in many, many innovative situations across the country. I want to pause for a second just because I'm self-conscious talking so much, and just ask if there are any reactions people might want to share in terms of what resonates, what doesn't resonate as you think about these 8 great leaps. And probably easier to just vocalize it as opposed to type it into the chat. So I'll just pause in case people want to jump in.
Hello, everyone. If you have a question and you want to be unmuted, you can click the hand icon located at the lower right hand of the screen.
I am also, for some reason, not able to see the chat, so I would absolutely ask folks to jump in if you can. Delano, since I can't see the chat, I'm gonna look to you for guidance. But would you? I'm happy to just keep moving on if that seems like the right thing to do.
Yeah, that seems like the right thing to do. I'll be monitoring the chat.
Okay, great. Just feel free to help me to keep an eye on it.
Okay.
Second, so the question we asked ourselves was, we're not the first people to talk about any of these leaps, individually or together, and yet the mainstream model of schooling still persists in the status quo. And why is that? And so we tried to understand how are all of us contributing to preserving the status quo? What are the ways that practitioners, parents, funders, designers, or product suppliers, et cetera, might be contributing? And what we realize is that nobody wants to perpetuate the status quo, but we are all facing dilemmas that end up leading us to make choices that do perpetuate the status quo. So, for example, practitioners, people who teach in and run schools, have, told us it's just hard enough to run my school, let alone innovate. Where am I going to find the time? Maybe I could go to a workshop on a Saturday and design something, but then I have to plan my lessons and go back to teaching the next day. I've got my school to run. Or I get a lot of pressure because I'm already well, rated as a school. Why would I want to mess with a good thing? And these are legitimate dilemmas that practitioners are feeling, that lead them to act in ways that might reinforce or perpetuate the status quo. Often, I love this cartoon, or this image. Probably many of you have seen this episode of I Love Lucy. But what we heard from a lot of practitioners is, it just feels like people are throwing one innovation at me, after the next, after the next, after the next. I can barely keep up with it, let alone run my own school. And so it's understandable. Funders or investors also have a dilemma. People want to see impact, return on investment. It's risky to reimagine and think, what is this going to turn out? How do I know what the metrics are going to be? It seems very speculative. And so it can be more natural, understandably, to invest in high quality implementations of current models as opposed to really in rethinking models. Those who supply products and might be in a place to design content or curriculum or different things like that often say to us, this is great, but this is one product. How's that going to add up to a whole school? I feel disconnected from folks who are actually doing the totality of the innovation. And parents, myself one of them, often have a hard time even imagining what it could look like for a different type of learning situation. We are often so accustomed to what school was like for ourselves, or marginalized by the current model, or just busy living life, or not wanting our kids to be guinea pigs, that it can be easier to kind of just find a good implementation of the current model as opposed to push for something different. And so when we thought about these dilemmas, we said, no wonder things are the way they are. And there's many other causes as well. But the question then became, well, what might be a theory of change that would allow us to break out of these dilemmas? Not in isolated situations, but really ultimately at scale for all kids. And we asked ourselves, is it even possible to do that? Because there have been many efforts over time. I mean, progressive education, in the 20th century, Coalition of Essential Schools, New American Schools Development Corporation, many people have been asking this question and pushing on it. And every time people ask it and push on it, there's progress, and there's progress to build on. But we actually thought there are some new conditions now that led us to be optimistic. The part of dissatisfied yet optimistic comes from seeing these new conditions that make whole school innovation more possible now than ever. One is lessons from high-performing schools, whether district schools, charter schools, innovative school systems like a Lindsay or a Summit, et cetera. There are already people who are doing great things for kids, and we're seeing more and more lessons of what that looks like, and those lessons are starting to get codified that we can build on. Second, there is a growing interest from mainstream schools and districts, and I can say this just even through Transcend, engaging with districts across the country. People are growing more and more dissatisfied. People are seeing that the world is changing and the education is not changing fast enough. People are seeing kids not being prepared for the jobs that they need to be prepared for. So there's just growing interest and growing demand. There are really exciting advances in learning sciences as well, neuroscience, learning science, identity research, et cetera, that we can build on. Lots of advances in human-centered design. Design thinking is much more understood, accepted, applied these days, and we think that has a huge role in the innovation process. There's just better technology, the internet and many different applications that build on the internet. And thankfully, there's a growing interest from funders to invest in this kind of R&D, who I think have also seen we're starting to hit the limits of just growing seats in the traditional model and really needing to prepare children differently. So these different conditions are what lead us to be optimistic. And the theory of change is relatively simple, probably deceptively simple, but it's one that we are testing out in various ways. All of us who are co-authors of this work, and so many of you on the webinar today are playing a role in this. But it's really a theory that could start anywhere in this diagram. But just to go clockwise from the upper left, it sort of says, if a small number of innovators can really go deep and invest and do the hardcore R&D work that we see in any other sector that's really trying to get a breakthrough, and truly build new models. And I'm not even saying new school models, because I think we need to even relax the constraint of what does school mean and look like, but build new models that get breakthrough results for kids on a broad range of outcomes. And if we can codify those models, we can make them more accessible to early adopters who may want to adopt all of the model, components of the model, etc. Those early adopters will keep innovating as well. And so they may become even more substantial innovators. But as children get exposed to this, as families get exposed to this, as we engage and do the deep community organizing work with communities, and communities recognize the power of new models, embrace them, and demand more and different kinds of educational experiences, that has the potential to push on policy, which has the potential to respond to that community demand by creating conditions that enable better innovation, and it has the potential to be a virtuous cycle. That's the kind of core of the theory that we are betting on. We realize that the theory may or may not play out, and there's some critical success factors. The critical success factors are, one, deep engagement of students, families, communities from the beginning. I think the education reform effort broadly has learned this lesson over and over again, that the leaders of this need to be kids and families, and those who are have most at stake in education. And so deeply engaging all stakeholders, and I would include educators, and that really matters tremendously. Second, concentrated R&D investments. So R&D investments that look more like what DARPA would invest when they have a major problem that the government or the military is facing, and bring together the best and brightest of thinkers and builders and doers from all different kinds of walks of life and expertise to come together in a deep way. The kinds of R&D investments that pharmaceutical companies would make, really, putting significant resources into the development of a drug, even to test it on a small number of patients, ultimately for the potential of benefiting large numbers of people. And that's because it requires, the R&D investments are necessary because it requires significant design talent and capacity. The places that we have seen do this work with some of the greatest success, districts like Lindsay Unified in California, charters like Summit Public Schools, other innovators like New Classrooms, Teach to One, have come to see that it takes instructional expertise, it takes learning science expertise, it takes technology expertise, it takes design thinking, it takes project management, it takes measurement, significant design talent and capacity. Otherwise, we're just asking educators to do this on the backs of teaching full-time, running schools full-time, and it's just too much for any person to handle. So it takes really bringing and growing significant design capacity, which can live and come inside of communities and districts, but it really needs to be orchestrated and dedicated for this kind of work. It also requires new measures of broader outcomes, because if we just measure new models by the traditional metrics of academic gains alone that can be seen on standardized tests, we're not going to be capturing the value of what new models need to be doing and can be doing. And that it does not at all mean to disregard academic measures. I believe it's critically important, but we need measures of how kids work in teams, the degree to which kids develop drive and empathy and self-awareness and executive function, the range of different things that we think are going to matter. And so we need real investments in measuring those broader outcomes so that we can study what works and what doesn't work and keep iterating better and better and faster and faster. And so that we can actually be spreading the things that seem to have the greatest success. It needs codification of the lessons in the models. It's not enough to build a beautiful, isolated example in a classroom or in a school or in a community somewhere. We actually need to be codifying, but both the model components themselves. How does reading get learned in this model? How are parents engaged in this model? How do we codify it in all kinds of ways, written ways, video ways, etc.? But also, what are the lessons from the process? Because the process matters just as much as the model, since no model is static. It's really going to continue evolving over time. And then last but absolutely not least, we need human capital pipelines. We need educators to be developed in ways that reflect the kinds of learning experiences that we are aspiring for kids. We need to be supplying schools with the very best educators, leaders, etc. Over time as more and more people come into this work. So we see these as almost preconditions of this theory of change. It's still early days, but we have early evidence. that makes us hopeful. I referenced places like Lindsay, places like Summit Public Schools, places like Achievement First Greenfield that has been developing a new K-8 model. These are places that are starting to build models that reflect many, if not all, of the 8 Great Leaps, and places that are beginning to codify their model so that others can try them as well. So all 4 of these are examples of not just promising models, but promising models that are codified, that have aspirations to support results for kids, not just in their communities, but really have relevance across the country and beyond. And we're seeing early evidence of positive impact. These are not the only ones, but certainly 4 that I think are worth highlighting. Let me actually pause here before I talk about Transcend and just see if there are any questions, comments, discussion points related to this theory of change. I would be really interested to hear the degree to which it resonates, questions, pushback, challenges. What are you all seeing? What are you all living?
Thanks so much, Jeff. This is Delano. So again, folks, if you have a question or you would like, so you can, 2 ways you can enter the question. One is to type it into the chat box, which we already had a couple. I'll get to those. But we also want to open up the lines, and the way that I can do that is by you clicking the small hand icon that's located at the bottom right hand of the screen. And Jeff, we had some technical difficulties earlier when you opened the line, and a couple people had raised their hand that didn't get a chance to speak. So I'm going to open it up now to Jessica Berwind. Jessica, if you're still in line, you're unmuted.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Hi, Jessica.
Oh, okay. I was really only just checking in to see whether you were receiving my chat or my voice. I am a relative novice at this, but everything that I have done in my work over the past couple of years reflects virtually everything that you're talking about. The concept of real commitment to R&D for the long term, a la a pharmaceutical company testing out a new drug, I think is a really interesting concept.
Great. Can you share an example or two, Jessica, of some things that you've done that feel consistent with this, that just for the sake of the group or the community here?
Well, I've just been doing, not just, but a group of us have been working in and around Philadelphia to identify learning innovations that are working. I don't really use the word education anymore because it sort of has it smacks of the images that you showed of, the standard classroom with students facing forward and a talking head. That clearly doesn't work for everybody. It does work for some, but it doesn't work for everybody, and it's not equitable. And it was established, I guess, during the Industrial Revolution, if not before. But so I've been on sort of a learning journey of my own, trying to understand what people are doing, what schools are doing out there. A lot of schools in Philadelphia that are sort of under the radar, that are public or charter, are doing a great deal of innovation. I think they can, in a way, because they're not being watched as closely. But I think, innovation needs to take place in all school environments and outside of school environments, with the understanding that learning happens all the time, everywhere, not just in the box of a school. So,
can you share one example of an innovation that you've come across?
Well, I've just been watching the Maker movement, which I think is fascinating, and blended learning, and all of the ones that I would assume everybody on your webcast is familiar with. Because I'm on the spot, of course, I can't think of a single example of a school. Catherine, maybe you could raise your hand and mention a school. There's Wissahickon Charter School in Philadelphia. And that's, she just texted me, Wissahickon Charter School. There are lots of district schools that none of you probably would have heard of, that are doing really innovative things in a more equitable, I would say, environment than sort of the private, college preparatory situations. I've also been working with Germantown Friends School, which is the school that my daughter was a lifer at. So she graduated a couple of years ago, which is a college prep school, and they're working on, you know, incorporating innovation. The challenge being that the teachers have so much on their plate already. There are places like the Wooden Boat Factory. There's a school that operates around the taking apart and putting together of cars in Philadelphia and learning all kinds of disciplines while doing that. And that's, you know, that's all I can think of at the moment.
It's exciting. It's really exciting. Thank you. Other comments or questions or reactions?
So I know Andrew Frischman sent me a message and said he wanted to ask a question. So I will unmute you now. Andrew, you're unmuted. Andrew?
Hi, Jeff. Delano, can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Hey, Andrew.
Great. Hey, Jeff. Glad to be reunited again. Sometimes
Exactly.
in person, sometimes virtually. I know I'm in a good conversation if you're around. I just wanted to say I appreciate getting a chance to hear this, having read Dissatisfied yet Optimistic a few times and had good conversations about it. I just see a ton of alignment with the way you're thinking about it and the way we experience sort of the world in the sector. So thank you again for, I think, articulating a lot of the real challenges that are out there and the steps, the hurdles and obstacles that need to be overcome. Like you, I think I share that optimism. I think one question that I wonder a bit about is it feels to me like there's a mix of people needing to know sort of deep learning theory, of which there are lots of examples out there. And then there also needs to be people who have access to like design thinking and protocols and change management processes, of which there are also lots of examples of folks. And so I guess I just wonder about how you see sort of the interplay and the way in which those two are related. Like, do you see more change? Like, I think ultimately it's going to take a combination of those two. But given your druthers, like, do you think there's more sort of fruitful opportunities, like starting with the folks who are like, deep practitioner learners and taking them through this design thinking change management process? Or do you think that if we start with sort of like really highly innovative design-oriented folks and then bring them up to speed with the learning theory and pedagogy, I don't know, maybe they're reciprocal and you need both. I'm just curious, like what your thinking is around those two.
Yeah, I love that question, and I could have just as easily included big picture and all in the slides, because I think what you all are doing is exactly aligned with this and so important too. I mean, I think what's interesting is that if you come at it from either one of those angles, if you come at it from saying, what does the science say about how kids actually learn? What do we know about working memory and the limits of working memory and how working memory transfers to long-term memory and how the brain works? And what do we know about the science of motivation and science of identity? About if you were literally just to design schools off of those kinds of insights and the growing number of insights, that alone would push for a very different design than the traditional model of school. We would not have many of those features of the old model of school that I talked through if we were just designing based on what's known about how people learn. Similarly, but I think one of the limitations of designing just off of the science is we're designing for real communities and real kids and with real and differing values and things like that. And so trying to just go off the science, I think, is incomplete. But similarly, if you were to design starting with asking kids, tell us about your experience at school and what are your dreams and what would be your, and parents, which we often do in our own design processes, literally, going home with kids till 10 o'clock at night and showing up at 6 in the morning the next day. From a human-centered design perspective, it would also lead you to not be replicating the traditional model of school and to be pushing towards many of these great leaps. But it would be insufficient because kids, parents, et cetera, are not experts in how does the brain work, what are the findings of learning science. So I think maybe the answer to your question, perhaps not surprisingly, is I actually think it's really powerful when you bring both of those things together. And when Transcend takes take school communities through design processes. Literally, we start with design thinking, and we start with users, and we start with empathy work, and we start with where's the future going. And the very next stop is we go to learning science, and we go to cognition and motivation and identity development, and then we say, how do we fuse those two things together? I don't know, Andrew, what you think of that, or how does that resonate with your own experience?
Yeah, I think so. I think there's a bunch of resonance. I'm in a lot of agreement with you there. I think that it's a question of wanting to sort of, I think they're best when they're sort of intertwined and braided with each other. Yeah. And I think the challenge with both of them is we can wind up in sort of jargon land and using terminology that, whether it's the students and families and community or our educators, I think we just need to be careful and keep it as grounded as possible in language that both directions can understand and speak the same. Because I think, so yes, in short, I agree with what you're saying, and I think that they're interdependent and when intertwined are really most powerful.
Yeah, and what we have started to find is that there's a third braid to that intertwining, which is change management and leadership of innovation, and that when that piece is missing, it doesn't even matter how good the insights are from the other two pieces, because that has to also be a huge part of the equation too.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think no surprise. I mean, that's a place where we align a bunch. Is I think ultimately it does come down to that leadership of that change management process. I mean, I think we really feel like in our work that the school leader is just so vitally important, right? In large part, you can train teachers, you can do these this work with students, but ultimately if there's the vision of that school leader to carry the change management process forward, and this is where we're trying to go, that's how we get to some truly sustainable change with an organization that's going to have a growth that's organized to learn and not just to execute over time, right?
Exactly. Yeah, we've learned a bunch of lessons around what are the capabilities required of a school leader or a district leader or a learning community leader. And one of the things we've seen is that there needs to be enough of the basics of how to just lead and manage adults and kids in muscle memory, so that basically, or long-term memory, so that working memory can be really focused on this question of change and what's different and innovation and learning and all that kind of thing. And if a leader is trying to simultaneously do all the innovation work and also learn how to be a leader, it just overwhelms the system, the person and the system.
Cool. Yeah, thanks so much, Jeff. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, yeah. Other questions, comments, thoughts?
Amber Oliver, you're unmuted.
Can you hear me?
Hey, Amber.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you see me?
I personally can't. I don't know if other people can.
Thank you so much. Wow, this is lovely. I've been really enjoying the conversation. So my question was, one of the things that we're in the process of doing a lot of what it is that you've laid out, where we're really dedicating our strategy of change to a proof point model, right? So let's show what it looks like someplace so that it can be codified and you can go and see it and experience it, with the idea that then that will catalyze at least some discussion for uptake. But one of the things that I've been thinking about is that for the initial innovators, right, that they're requiring this, what I've been calling a steward, I think what Elan was calling a general contractor, right, the role that Transcend is playing. And part of what I'm starting to question is when the early adopters come in, right, when the hard work of moving through the iterative process of designing the model and then codifying it so it can be demonstrated, what do you see that codification, meaning that the group of early adopters who come in, generally speaking, wouldn't need that steward role because enough of it has been outlined, or that actually, even when you know what it is that you're trying to replicate, that you would still need that additional support in the school?
Yeah. So my sense is that you still need it, but it looks different and is less resource intensive than what the innovators need. And I think Andrew would probably have some interesting advice to offer just from seeing big picture and schools move into the big picture model, but we're also watching Summit Learning Program and Basecamp and the kinds of supports and mentorship that schools need to take that on as well, or to teach to one, et cetera. It seems like in any of the situations that I've seen, it still requires coaching, mentoring, stewardship, et cetera. And the more disruptive the model is to the traditional structures of school, I think the more the change management types of supports are needed. I think it's a different kind of general contractor type of support that the innovators need, because the innovators are also literally building from scratch. And so they have to actually bring together all the components that are required to build. I think with early adopters, so much of it is around adult mindset, adult skill development, adult change management. I think we see that the kids actually change much faster than the adults, not surprisingly. But there's a lot of adaptive work and even just loss to cope with on the part of adults. And then there's just technical things like, all right, how are we going to change the bell schedule? How are we going to change parent communications, et cetera? That I think, even when things are well codified, requires at least some coaching and mentoring. And our theory is that often, if those folks can come out of the ranks of the team that has helped the innovators build this in the first place, they will be most steeped in it and know it. But something is required. I don't know if anybody has a different point of view or anything to add to that. So Amber, is that responsive?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, that's great.
Good. Why don't I keep rolling forward the last couple of slides, and then I'll do one more pause for any comment or discussion. So the last thing I was going to share is just the organization that I am part of, Transcend, the ways in which we are trying to help to accelerate and advance this theory of change. And we are basically, we're only 2 years old, so we're still learning about ourselves and learning about the best ways that we can contribute, but we're coming to look at ourselves as an R&D engine for school model innovation. And really try to fulfill that role of an R&D innovation in 3 ways. One is to build a pipeline of ready school communities. And I should put school in quotation marks here, but really trying to identify and source and help to cultivate and prime those school communities that we think are best positioned to be innovators and early adopters. And we do this partly through direct outreach, partly through building a network, partly even through some cohort programming that we run. But a big part of what we do is actually finding folks. And it's not hard to find folks, but it is hard to find folks who are truly ready. So helping to cultivate the readiness is a big part of what we do. The second is that we are building capacity that's required to do all the design, the iteration, the codification, managing change, et cetera. So Amber's question was just touching on this, but based on the premise that this type of R&D does require such significant capacity, a big part of what we do is we're building that capacity. We have a network, but both a small team and a broader network of capacity that we bring to bear. And the third is building actionable knowledge regarding model innovation. So we have a learning agenda. We've seen a common set of questions that innovators are facing across many, many different communities and situations. Questions around the design of models. How do you foster social emotional development? How do you measure it? How do you codify models, et cetera? So we have a prioritized learning agenda. And then we go back to the science and we say, what does the science of learning say? What does the science of implementation say? What happens in other industries? What are best practices? We translate that knowledge into actionable packages for the folks who are doing this innovating, both the ones that Transcend works with and more broadly. And so really what we see ourselves doing is bringing together ready school communities with the knowledge that they need to innovate, with the capacity that they innovate. And you'll have to bear with me on the graphic image here, but if you imagine these things kind of spinning as an engine, it might look something like this, where the talent capacity and the pipeline and the actionable knowledge all kind of comes together to give lift to these innovation efforts all over the country and all over the field. Here's some examples of folks that we have been working with. This is not everyone that we're working with, but just some examples of the kinds of innovation projects that are possible when these pieces of the engine come together to turbocharge the effort. So I'll pause one more time for questions, comments, discussion. We have from 5 or so minutes. If folks have things, I'd love to hear your reactions, thoughts, pushbacks, questions.
Folks, if you have a question, you can raise your hand or you can drop them into the chat box. And how you raise your hand is by going to participants and looking at the right-hand bottom of the participant screen. It's a hand icon. You click that. It lets me know you want to speak. I unmute you, and we flow. Jeff, there was a question that came in the chat box from James Bailey. I'm not sure if you answered it already, but James asked, are there emerging R&D funds?
So I think the answer is it's a work in process, at least from where I see it. I'm seeing more funders recognize the need for this and start to be making bets on models. One of the, I think, trends that I'm seeing in terms of what philanthropists and investors seem to be interested in is this phenomenon called model providers. With the big picture being one example of that, Summit being another example of that, Achievement First Greenfield having the potential to be, new classrooms having the potential to be, et cetera. Whereas I think funders or investors historically might have said, oh, here's a great model. How many schools can we fund them to replicate to, and how fast can that happen? I think funders are starting to say, there may be an additional way to reach kids at scale faster, which is how do we actually really invest in the R&D, get the model strong, get the model codified, support the spread of the model as a way to potentially even get to scale faster. And so I think there's emerging funds that I'm seeing. I think the field, education still invests such little amount of money out of total budget in R&D that we would have a long way to go before we're commensurate with most other industries. But I'm seeing early signs that is coming to pass. I don't know if others are seeing that too or seeing it differently, but it gives me hope. Great. Delano, any other comments or questions in the chat, or anybody else want to jump in?
There's no more questions in the chat. I can unmute the people that have already raised their hand, and if you have any comments. So we have, Taylor, you're unmuted. Hello, Taylor. Could you turn your phone up a little bit? Having a little bit of trouble hearing you.
Sorry, I'm gonna work here. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you.
Yeah, I'm wondering. Hey, Jeff, how you doing?
Good. How are you?
Good. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about some of the results that you had from the schools that you worked with. So whether it be Summit or Greenfield, and thinking about maybe even beyond results, but like what are some of the ways that you've engaged the school and the community, some specifics and tangibles that have come about from the work over the last couple of years?
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing I'd be happy to do if you or anybody wants to follow up, one of the things we try hard to do is to really document the process and the learnings along the way of our work. So there's a great case study of the first year of the Achievement First Greenfield pilot that I'd be happy to share. But one of the things that is not yet measurable, but I think is promising, and I'm also happy to talk about the measurable results, which have been very, very promising academically. But one of the really interesting aspects of the Achievement First Greenfield model is the ways in which parents are deeply engaged. And so the way that I look at it is that the model is really designed around every child's unique hopes, dreams, aspirations, goals for their life. And the way that is operationalized is that every child has what's called a dream team. And so the dream team consists of, could be mom or dad or grandma or a foster parent or a coach or a pastor, but a handful of caring adults in a kid's life. It could be a sister or a brother. It's usually got an educator. It's usually got another kid as well. And the purpose of the Dream Team is to be there with a kid right from the very beginning days of kindergarten all the way up through college, to help kids identify their dreams, articulate their dreams, catch them when they fall, and most importantly, convert their dreams into goals that they can then pursue in a very self-directed way throughout school and throughout their lives. And so what's been really exciting to see with the Achievement First Greenfield model is that these Dream Teams have really come to life and been activated. And in the next couple of weeks, we actually have a video that we're going to put out that will share some, that will illuminate and share some illustrations of what these Dream Teams look like in action. But when I think about that compared to the level of engagement that parents typically have in a school, it's just dramatically different. And when I listen to kids literally themselves, talking and making presentations about their dreams and goals and reflecting on their progress and where they want to try harder, etc. To me, it's just one example that gives me a lot of hope in terms of what's possible with models like this. So, Taylor, I'm not positive if that was speaking directly to your question. If not, feel free to add or redirect me here. Yeah.
All right, Taylor, you still there? You good?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep,
yeah.
We can hear you.
Oh, okay, I didn't know if you could hear me there. Yeah, I think it does. I'd be really curious to kind of talk a little bit more about, or hear a little bit more, not talk, but about like you were talking about the 8th grade week at the very beginning, and thinking specifically about like with the work around what it sounds like you're doing at AF Greenfield seems awesome. It seems really supportive, and it does sound innovative in the sense of I don't see those supports at schools very often. I guess I'm curious about like even more like curriculum standpoint and what that looks like on the ground to really implement thoughtfully what these 8 great leaps can mean for a community.
Yeah, I'll say a little bit more about Greenfield and a couple of other examples of some other places, and then happy to follow up as well. Just from a curriculum perspective, if Dream Teams help kids articulate their dreams and convert them into goals, in a traditional school model, school would function almost irrespective of a kid's goals. It's kind of like, we have goals as a school. Here they are, and come and first grade, second grade, just follow through. Versus in a model like a Greenfield model, and that model is still obviously ripening and iterating, and so it's continuing to reach its potential. But there are multiple different learning modes, and so there's parts of the day where kids are doing self-directed learning and choosing where and in what pace and the ways in which they move through content. There's parts of the days when kids are doing things that look more like tutoring, where educators who are specialized in small group reading and detecting and correcting errors and really things that are best done in a tutorial kind of format, which is what most affluent kids get when they when they need help, and what the research shows is so effective. There's parts of the day where there's large group things happening, but only parts of the day when large group is warranted, whether that's a seminar discussion or a science lab or different things like that. There's parts of the day where kids are doing martial arts, and there's parts of the day where kids are doing STEM inventions, and there's parts of the day where kids are doing high heart rate moments, given the research on brain science and high heart rate. And then there's parts of the year when school literally moves into expeditions, and school happens outside of the walls of school as well. And so all of those different components come together to really help advance across these 8 great leaps, and there's more. But those are examples. Summit is another example where kids are really having a chance to demonstrate mastery of cognitive skills through different different modalities, different projects, moving a lot of self-directed learning time. There's places like Lindsay where kids are starting to not even necessarily identify as a 3rd grader, but more identifying where am I on the content level in math and reading, and how am I going to make sure I'm bringing my friends along with me and we're all moving down this level. So there's just really exciting examples of different ones of these leaps happening in parts or whole. And maybe I'll just end by saying, I think, while on the one hand there has been awesome innovation happening, for decades by amazing educators, it's coming together in a new way. I think at this moment in an era in education that I think just gives us all a fresh opportunity to really keep pushing. And I would say we're early in the game. Like, it's early innings. All of these models are still iterating and growing and moving and pushing beyond the bounds. And I didn't even talk about some models that are happening fully outside the walls of quote school. But it's just such an exciting time for us to be trying this and learning. And I think the key is just to continue to take the long view, to continue to engage kids and families at the center of the whole thing, and to continue to draw from rigorous learning science, as Andrew was talking about as well. So Delano, unless there's anything burning, I want to respect people's time and think maybe is this the right moment to stop?
Yep, I think it is. Thank you, Jeff, so much for presenting to our group. Thank you, everybody, for joining. I'll send out an email, follow-up email, and I'll include Jeff's contact if it's okay with you, Jeff.
Absolutely, yes,
please. A recording of this session today. So stay tuned for an announcement that'll come out with details about our next session. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Jeff. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks, Jeff. Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Good job.